Hi everybody, we're going to begin. We're 15 minutes late, but I know that's the morning, we have to wake up and we have to arrive. Welcome to this workshop. This workshop is called Technology, Growth and Sustainability, with, I think, a provocative question that we put today. Is this technology, growth and sustainability the more than holy trinity? Because as yesterday Tim Jackson said, I think you remember in the morning, he said that growth is more than a rational model. That's about faith. So that's why we use today the Holy Trinity to have this debate around technology. Because, as you know, technology is quite a controversial issue, most of all for the people working in the post-growth movement and the post-growth issues. Most of all because I think that on the side, that won't be a debate about we are in favor against technology, because a lot of people, everybody is in favor of technology. For example, the post-growth movement, when you say we want renewables, yeah, for sure, we want a new technology. But at the same time, we have the debate, is technology the solution for everything? Because something that we can see, for example, and I saw in all debate we had, for example, for the recast of the energy derivatives, and that's true that I have got this answer a lot of MEPs, for example, from other groups, when you can see that technology is the solution for everything. Because I think that we all know that we have some problem with growth. We have the good side of growth, the light side, the bright side, no, with all the things that we achieved in the last 15 years. But at the same time, we have this dark side of the growth. And I think that everybody recognizes right now that we have this dark side. But one kind of response is to say, well, if we have the dark side of growth, we'll have technology to solve all this problem. And this problem we will solve, it will have sustainability. That's why we have this growth, technology, sustainability triangle that we will discuss today. But at the same time, we have the criticism that we can imagine of technology. That's not about we are in favor or against. We are talking about the limits of technology. We are talking, for example, of ecological footprint of technology. We are talking about the use of raw materials. We are talking about the impacts that can have, for example, the multiplication of the different smart grids, smart meters, and all the smart things that we can imagine. And at the same time, we can talk about the rebound effect, something that we talked a lot about with the European Commission, how we do take into account this rebound effect. I think you all know this concept of rebound effect, because we all know that we have some reduction of, for example, emissions, or we have some better use of energy efficiency thanks to technology. But at the same time, we know that the reduction of loss of gains from new technology that increase the energy efficiency can be lost because of systemic response. For example, if you have today a car is much more efficient than 20 years ago. That's true. The car is much more efficient. But at the same time, we sell some more cars. The car going faster. The car is going further. And we have a lot of new smart things inside the car. And at the end, all we gain with the new technology, that means the car is more efficient, we lost it on the other way because we have some more cars going faster and further. So that's the rebound effect. So we need to know how we take it into account when we do some energy policy, for example, economic policy, or when we have some economic policy here in the European Union. So to talk about these things about technology, growth and sustainability, we have 4 speakers with, I think, different views of the use of technology and the rebound effect, ecological footprint. And I will present all of our speakers, but one by one, but just remember that we will do it that way. We have now, I think, 2 hours and 10 minutes, so we'll try to do first 15 minutes maximum. 15 minutes maximum. I will be very strict on time for everybody. 15 minutes maximum to present your point of view. Then we will have like 2 minutes each speaker to answer each other if you want, if you have a point that you want to raise, but you listen to the previous speaker. And then we'll have the debate with the room, like I will take 5 or 6 questions at a time, and then we'll have this debate with all the speakers and the assistants. Remember, you can follow it on, we have the people, hi everybody, on the streaming. We have questions with the Slido thing. That's a new technology thing that we have, Slido. And if I remember well, you have to make a password to make a question on Slido. That's 8812. Not for you, that's for people in the streaming. And that's all, I think. And on Twitter, you have a hashtag, that's postgrowth 2018. If you want to tweet something, you can do it. That's an open event, so there's no problem to do that. So let's begin. Let's begin with the first speaker. Here on my right, that's José Bellver, coming from Spain. José Bellver is an economist, and he works at FUHEM Ecosocial. That's a research center focused on socio-economic and ecological issues from a critical and transdisciplinary perspective. And José wrote an article. He was an author for a recent book publication that we did in Spain about the fourth revolution. The fourth industrial revolution. And he wrote the part on technology. So that's why he will begin to give the first global and the big picture of what we are talking about. So you have 15 minutes to do it, and I will give you the paper with 2 minutes left when you arrive. Good luck to do that.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much, Florent, for the presentation. Thank you, the organizers, for the invitation and to organize such a good event as this one. Actually, Florent, you already said much of what I'm going to say. so thank you, because that way I'll be faster in many cases. Also, I'd like to say I'm very happy to participate in such a fascinating debate on this holy trinity of technology, sustainability, and growth. And as Florent was saying, the title is already suggesting the fact that when it comes to technology, we seem to be talking in some cases of a certain kind of religious dogma, which is like technology as the salvation, the divine salvation, right? Actually, when it comes to the interpretations of the future, there is a certain consensus that indeed, we are at the threshold of a breaking point in history, but the interpretations of this future actually are colliding. On one hand, you have the indicators that tell you that we could be like sinking in the Titanic, and on the other hand, we are being suggested that we are taking off in the Enterprise spaceship into our galactic future, something like that, right? This is what another colleague recently called the most troublesome paradoxes of our time, which is this cognitive discordance between the extremely optimistic expectations of technological development and the disastrous consequences of our state of ecological overreach. We've already talked about this, but let us remember the essentials. From an ecological point of view, we've been exceeding planet's carrying capacity already since the beginning of the 70s, so we are now living beyond or above our biospheric possibilities for more than 4 decades. Today, ecological footprint is over 70% of Earth biocapacity. Also, on the other hand, we have a huge consensus about the different planetary boundaries or its dramatic consequences on what regards climate disruption, ocean acidification, loss of biodiversity, and other deterioration of ecosystems. So it's rock storming colleagues, we all know about this. But adding to this, we also have the issue about energy peaks, such as oil or mostly fossil fuels, which already the International Energy Agency has recognized that we have already surpassed, and that we will sooner or later, well, that was for conventional oil, but sooner or later it will be like that for gas and also coal. And with these energetic perspectives, also especially regarding what has to do with non-conventional fuels, the problem is the energetic cost. So we're talking here about the energy returns on input, talking about, for example, the fact that we are not today living in that world that we could see in movies where some American farmers would be doing a hole in their garden and there was a huge stream of petroleum coming out, right? That was a time where we had like 100 barrels of oil for one invested in its extraction. Nowadays, of course, it's much more expensive energetically. You're going to see that we're going to be building all kinds of platforms to dig the whole, to dig further to have that energy. So, in the best of the cases, we're talking about 20-to-1 relationship. In the case of non-conventional oils, we're talking about even 3-to-1 when compared to renewable energies. The range is from 5-to-1 to 15-to-1, and depending on if we're talking about wind energy or sun energy. This is because we first extract the more accessible and higher quality resources, and then we have progressively turned towards the extraction of other resources that are more difficult to access in lower levels of concentration and of lower quality and decreasing amounts. That is what the Club of Rome report of the Meadows report was actually saying. Yesterday, Tim Jackson was talking about this, and this is what Ugo Bardi has already revisited, and it's continuing to happen. So today, we need much more infrastructure for this energy system, and what this means is that also with minerals, we're going to have an important issue of depletion, which is not the fact that we're running out of these minerals or these fuels. It's the fact that once you arrive to the peak, every year that passes, you're going to have less extraction and more expensive extraction, first on an energetic issue, but also it will then come to prices and economic costs. So these data, what they anticipate in any case, is serious problems for the world economy, besides from the rising of all kinds of socio-ecological and geopolitical conflicts that we'll increasingly be confronted with. We thus could say that, in the whole, we are living in a sort of civilizational bubble, and this surpassing of the planetary boundaries and all its dimensions is actually making this bubble explode. So, however, from time to time, we can see an old discourse often reappearing with a renewed impulse. That is basically the one that states that our pathological relationship with between our social metabolism and biosphere is just a technical issue. What would suggest that we could transit from the limits to the growth of the limits, with the help of human ingenuity. What is behind the idea of sustainable development in many cases, or behind this promoted fourth industrial revolution promoted by the World Economic Organization, talking about big promises from southern countries, especially you have many from Latin America, but also from Africa. Next slide. In most of the cases, they are not being recovered. Can we really be talking about a circular economy? Or should we, because we have like none more than 1% recycling in many of the rare earth minerals, for example, and it's actually because of there's a big difficulty here, since there's a huge dispersion at the world scale of all these equipments, and there's also mineral mixing that makes it very difficult to recover. So there is a circular in a certain way that is the boomerang effect of all these electronic equipments that have all these minerals that are actually coming back to many of these territories as electronic waste. Guillaume, I hope you're going to be talking about this. And this happens a little bit the same with decarbonization. There's a dependency on minerals in renewables devices, and you have some data there about the problems of electrification of transport that actually also rely on next slide. In most of the cases, they are not being recovered. Can we really be talking about a circular economy? Or should we, because we have like none more than 1% recycling in many of the rare earth minerals, for example, and it's actually because of there's a big difficulty here, since there's a huge dispersion at the world scale of all these equipments, and there's also mineral mixing that makes it very difficult to recover. So there is a circular in a certain way that is the boomerang effect of all these electronic equipments that have all these minerals that are actually coming back to many of these territories as electronic waste. Guillaume, I hope you're going to be talking about this. And this happens a little bit the same with decarbonization. There's a dependency on minerals in renewables devices, and you have some data there about the problems of electrification of transport that actually also rely on scarce minerals. So my final remarks will just be, that's the last slide, please, that new technologies might be limited by ecological constraints. Eco-efficiency might create rebound effects that accelerate the clash with Earth's biophysical limits. Also, we might have opportunity costs on how we use those scarce resources. Should we use it in transitions, or should we energetic transition, or are we going to be using them in all these technological hypes? There is a direct proportional capacity of this progress in new technologies with the economic and political power centers to hoard global energy and material supplies. So there's an equity issue. And it doesn't seem that these progresses might be generalizable to all societies. And finally, what I was saying at the beginning, the institutional framework is for sure a key issue. So it depends very much, the impacts that technologies might have depend very much on whether the targets are growth and profit or more like well-being, distribution, and sufficiency as a framework. So I think that's going to be it. I'm sorry for the time exceeding. Thank you.
Gracias, José. Almost succeeded. 15 minutes, almost. But that's okay. 15 minutes. You had to run at the end. That was a very dense presentation, right? You give a lot of concepts that I think that can challenge the other speakers. I'm sure about that because you talk about the EROI, the energy return on investment. You talk about the peak everything, not only the peak oil, but also the peak everything. You talk about sufficiency and not only efficiency. I think that would be a question afterwards for Paul, because that's something that yesterday we talked about in the energy workshop that we did. Should we talk about efficiency or should we talk about sufficiency? That's not the same thing. And you talk about the no decoupling. I think that's a debate that we have all days. Are we really decoupling or not the economy and the GDP? In that case, you are saying that we are not decoupling if we look at the global level. I think that's a remark that I hope that maybe from the European Commission we can have some more inputs. And you said something that's quite important, I think, because sometimes we just forget it. That's the cloud, this cloud that we say, that's not immaterial. This thing, for example, is not immaterial. That's a lot of energy, that's just a lot of material, that's a lot of water, for example, to do that, and that's something that you have to find. You have to make a cable to go to a power plant, and then you have all this infrastructure to give some energy to this thing to work. So I think that's something that's very challenging, that you said, because I think that the conclusion I can understand from what you said, that we can't make a generalization of this system. So maybe that's the best thing to do, to go to the European Commission, DG Research in that case. That's Doris Schroecker. You are the head of unit of strategy for the DG Industrial Technologies, Research and Innovation. So we look forward to listen to you and to your comments on what you said before. 15 minutes also.
Thank you very much for the invitation. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very pleased to be here because this discussion is not only very important in the light of the challenges we are facing, but from our perspective, it is also a good moment because we are just preparing the next generation of European-level instruments, which should actually help to address these challenges. So this is the perspective from which I'm speaking. Let's say, the directorate in DG Research and Innovation in which I'm working, we are dealing with the industry and industrial technologies, and that will be the perspective and the examples that I'm giving, but we can have, of course, a more generic discussion. Technology, growth, and sustainability are very tightly linked. We have reached a common understanding that technological innovation is key for growth, even if we challenge now the growth assumptions. I realize that. Just these days, we are recalling the financial crisis of 10 years ago, and we all came to realize that those economies which actually had a strong research and innovation and also industrial basis came out of this more easily. So the question is, what does this tell us? There are other indicators as well. And what we see is that technology-driven innovations, the increasing digitization of all sectors, and global megatrends are changing the way we live. They offer huge opportunities, but they also create new challenges. That is in all developed economies, and we are speaking about Europe here, but you see it worldwide. As this trend accelerates, the need to innovate will be even more acute. Countries around the world are massively investing in research and innovation in all areas of the economy and in game-changing technologies. This race is on, and the question is, where does Europe stand? Also in the context of the discussion today. I would like to plea for optimism. But Europe has to intensify its efforts. You're smiling, you've heard that before. So now I try to give you my examples. Europe has an excellent knowledge base. I repeat.
There is a circular in a certain way that is the boomerang effect of all these electronic equipments that have all these minerals that are actually coming back to many of these territories as electronic waste. Guillaume, I hope you're going to be talking about this. And this happens a little bit the same with decarbonization. There's a dependency on minerals in renewables devices, and you have some data there about the problems of electrification of transport that actually also rely on scarce minerals. So my final remarks will just be, that's the last slide, please, that new technologies might be limited by ecological constraints. Eco-efficiency might create rebound effects that accelerate the clash with Earth's biophysical limits. Also, we might have opportunity costs on how we use those scarce resources. Should we use it in transitions, or should we energetic transition, or are we going to be using them in all these technological hypes? There is a direct proportional capacity of this progress in new technologies with the economic and political power centers to hoard global energy and material supplies. So there's an equity issue. And it doesn't seem that these progresses might be generalizable to all societies. And finally, what I was saying at the beginning, the institutional framework is for sure a key issue. So it depends very much, the impacts that technologies might have depend very much on whether the targets are growth and profit or more like well-being, distribution, and sufficiency as a framework. So I think that's going to be it. I'm sorry for the time exceeding. Thank you.
Gracias, José. Almost succeeded. 15 minutes. Almost. But that's okay. 15 minutes. You have to run at the end. That was a very dense presentation, right? You give a lot of concepts that I think that can challenge the other speakers. I'm sure about that because you talk about the ROI, the energy return on investment. You talk about the peak everything, not only the peak oil, but also the peak everything. You talk about sufficiency and not only efficiency. I think that would be a question afterwards for Paul, because that's something that yesterday we talked about in the energy workshop that we did. Should we talk about efficiency or should we talk about sufficiency? That's not the same thing. And you talk about the no decoupling. I think that's a debate that we have all days. Are we really decoupling or not the economy and the GDP? In that case, you are saying that we are not decoupling if we look at the global level. I think that's a remark that I hope that maybe from the European Commission we can have some more inputs. And you said something that's quite important, I think, because sometimes we just forget it. That's the cloud, this cloud that we say, that's not immaterial. This thing, for example, is not immaterial. That's a lot of energy. That's just a lot of material. That's a lot of water, for example, to do that. And that's something that you have to find. You have to make a cable to go to a power plant, and then you have all this infrastructure to give some energy to this thing to work. So I think that's something that's very challenging, that you said, because I think that the conclusion I can understand from what you said, that we can't make a generalization of this system. So maybe that's the best thing to do, to go to the European Commission, DG Research in that case. That's Doris Schroecker. You are the head of unit of strategy for the DG Industrial Technologies, Research and Innovation. So we look forward to listen to you and to your comments on what you said before. 15 minutes also.
Thank you very much for the invitation. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very pleased to be here because this discussion is not only very important in the light of the challenges we are facing, but from our perspective, it is also a good moment because we are just preparing the next generation of European-level instruments which should actually help to address these challenges. So this is the perspective from which I'm speaking. Let's say, the directorate in DG Research and Innovation in which I'm working, we are dealing with the industry and industrial technologies, and that will be the perspective and the examples that I'm giving, but we can have, of course, a more generic discussion. Technology, growth, and sustainability are very tightly linked. We have reached a common understanding that technological innovation is key for growth, even if we challenge now the growth assumptions. I realize that. Just these days, we are recalling the financial crisis of 10 years ago, and we all came to realize that those economies which actually had a strong research and innovation and also industrial basis came out of this more easily. So the question is, what does this tell us? There are other indicators as well. And what we see is that technology-driven innovations, the increasing digitization of all sectors, and global megatrends are changing the way we live. They offer huge opportunities, but they also create new challenges. That is in all developed economies, and we are speaking about Europe here, but you see it worldwide. As this trend accelerates, the need to innovate will be even more acute. Countries around the world are massively investing in research and innovation in all areas of the economy and in game-changing technologies. This race is on, and the question is, where does Europe stand? Also in the context of the discussion today. I would like to plea for optimism, but Europe has to intensify its efforts. You're smiling, you've heard that before. So now I try to give you my examples. Europe has an excellent knowledge base. I repeat figures you may have heard already from my commissioner and in other contexts, but with only 7% of the global population, Europe accounts for some 20% of the global R&D expenditures and a third of all high-level publications. Where we need actually to be better is in private investments to pick up on these research and innovation results and to take them to the market. And that is not only in general, but I would like to focus that for the purpose of today also on sustainability aspects. Europe has to invest in the right areas, in particular stimulating potentially groundbreaking innovations and to enable companies to cross the infamous valley of death, because that is a burden also in particular on sustainability. We need to prioritize, and we make an effort at European level. We need to prioritize technologies which enable innovation across all sectors, stimulate disruptive innovations, because incremental improvements are not enough anymore if we look into the challenges we just heard described, and which themselves have the potential to create new markets and business models. And they need to underpin the sustainability, which is actually, and I would like to stress that, which is part of Europe's leadership, also of Europe's industrial leadership. This brings me to what we call key enabling technologies. That is a word to describe a set of technologies which actually fulfill these criteria. We are speaking about technology areas like advanced manufacturing technologies, materials and nanotechnologies, life science technologies, micro nano electronics, photonics, artificial intelligence, and security and connectivity technologies. These technologies are the engine of Europe's industrial competitiveness. The manufacturing sector builds very much on this high-tech, and where Europe is successful, they combine this high-tech, I would say also with sustainability developments. We speak about the chemical and the machinery industry, the pharmaceutical and the food industries. What do I want to say? I want to say that if we want to have changes at the higher level, at systemic level, we need the industry to go along with that. And the question is, what does it mean? Considering the potential, and not to say the need, also for some sort of economic returns, and I'm interested to see what that means in the sufficiency context, including also income and jobs. That is the relationship in which we see also the need for keeping a strong industry in Europe, and also for returning some of the production elements with a sustainability dimension in Europe. This is also where I would like to refer to the different elements of sustainability. We focus a lot on environmental sustainability, and we expect that technological progress contributes to mitigate negative impact. And that is also where we focus the European investments in research and innovation. When I ask around about examples for this, I still get references on the list of key enabling technologies, stressed in particular this societal dimension, and asked for a focus on inclusive growth. This is a very specific European way, with a strong focus on environmental protection to lower inequalities, and we would like to take social cohesion and this legal framework to protect the citizens as an issue and as an asset to the future. In order to do that, we need to master these key technologies as well, and we need to keep, and where needed, bring back critical parts of global value chains to Europe. This concept of European sovereignty from a technological perspective is not a simple Europe-first approach, but it's a necessity to keep the capacity to act and to set new benchmarks. What sovereignty from a technological perspective is not a simple Europe-first approach, but it's a necessity to keep the capacity to act and to set new benchmarks. What I would like to say is that sustainability and this interaction with growth and technology has always played a relevant role in our framework programs. We are just now preparing the next European framework program, Horizon Europe. We are just discussing also a very open strategic programming approach with the member states, and we are looking into the amendments which we are expecting from the European Parliament. And we would like to, I describe in the key elements. So we would like to continue an industry-oriented research and innovation for the reason that big changes need to be carried also by the industries doing that in their way of acting. We are going for a big impact orientation, which means that we look at the impact beyond research and innovation. We look at the conditions and the complexity as well of many questions. We are planning to continue working in public-private and also public-public partnerships, where it is needed to reduce fragmentation, to create critical mass, and to achieve concrete objectives. And you will have heard about the mission orientation, where we would like to have, even beyond the industries, a broader and goal setting and direction giving to research and innovation, which is also finding its roots and a home in the openness of and the views of citizens. Thank you. If we want to successfully address systemic changes, we need also to involve new partners. We are traditionally working with the industry, but what we see here, and I take industrial symbiosis as an example, the industry needs to work together with land use planners, the energy sector, the regional and local dimension of decision makings, and the framework conditions for deployment in the end. We are concerned what it means for the energy system if industry, notably the energy-intensive industries, would succeed in switching from fossil fuels to electrification, because that has massive changes also for the energy system in place. With these links, we are at an early stage, and we need more of this. Industry and energy stakeholders need to speak to each other. We need also different disciplines to be associated and contributing to these discussions and activities. I speak about planners, designers, experts in socio-economic questions, change management, different sectors also connecting to each other. And we would welcome a dialogue and cooperation between NGOs and the industry to express some thoughts here. We are working to this and open to this, because what we see is that the technologies in themselves are only as good as they can be used, and they really lead to a change. And I'm just speaking about Europe here, while all of this has a global dimension as well. So I hope that this overview and the examples show you that we are fully committed to the concept of sustainability and to addressing the big challenges. We don't have the solutions yet. We are also, and this is maybe an advantage for me, we are in the area of research and innovation. We need to structure the complexity, and we are facing really a new situation with the broadness and the vastness of complexity. So we are looking for solutions and how best to approach that. I see a need to go away from the traditional technology roadmaps as well, to have much more societally relevant roadmaps which take more into account than we have previously done. Promising and successful research and innovation results need the right framework conditions for really reaching the desired and the needed impact. We can do a lot of research on these conditions and also on socio-economic and how people feel and these kind of things. It will not replace the decision-making itself. But this is why I'm pleased to be here in the European Parliament on this subject, and I hope that you understand a little bit the approach which we are taking, and I hope that I learn a lot from the later discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doris. It was quite clear after listening to José, then listening to you. I think we have two different analyses. I can say that way. Because that's true, and I think you made some point. You made some point, because when I listen to what say José, or what can say the post-growth movement, for example, I think that you made a point that the European Commission made yesterday also. That I think that's
capacity to act and to set new benchmarks. What I would like to say is that sustainability and this interaction with growth and technology has always played a relevant role in our framework programs. We are just now preparing the next European framework program, Horizon Europe. We are just discussing also a very open strategic programming approach with the member states, and we are looking into the amendments which we're expecting from the European Parliament. And we would like to, so I describe in the key elements. So we would like to continue an industry-oriented research and innovation for the reason that big changes need to be carried also by the industries doing that in their way of acting. We are going for a big impact orientation, which means that we look at the impact beyond research and innovation. We look at the conditions and the complexity as well of many questions. We are planning to continue working in public-private and also public-public partnerships, where it is needed to reduce fragmentation, to create critical mass, and to achieve concrete objectives. And you will have heard about the mission orientation, where we would like to have, even beyond the industries, a broader and goal setting and direction giving to research and innovation, which is also finding its roots and a home in the openness of and the views of citizens. Thank you. If we want to successfully address systemic changes, we need also to involve new partners. We are traditionally working with the industry, but what we see here, and I take industrial symbiosis as an example, the industry needs to work together with land use planners, the energy sector, the regional and local dimension of decision makings, and the framework conditions for deployment in the end. We are concerned what it means for the energy system if industry, notably the energy-intensive industries, would succeed in switching from fossil fuels to electrification, because that has massive changes also for the energy system in place. With these links, we are at an early stage, and we need more of this. Industry and energy stakeholders need to speak to each other. We need also different disciplines to be associated and contributing to these discussions and activities. I speak about planners, designers, experts in socio-economic questions, change management, different sectors also connecting to each other. And we would welcome a dialogue and cooperation between NGOs and the industry to express some thoughts here. We are working to this and open to this, because what we see is that the technologies in themselves are only as good as they can be used, and they really lead to a change. And I'm just speaking about Europe here, while all of this has a global dimension as well. So I hope that this overview and the examples show you that we are fully committed to the concept of sustainability and to addressing the big challenges. We don't have the solutions yet. We are also, and this is maybe an advantage for me, we are in the area of research and innovation. We need to structure the complexity, and we are facing really a new situation with the broadness and the vastness of complexity. So we are looking for solutions and how best to approach that. I see a need to go away from the traditional technology roadmaps as well, to have much more societally relevant roadmaps which take more into account than we have previously done. Promising and successful research and innovation results need the right framework conditions for really reaching the desired and the needed impact. We can do a lot of research on these conditions and also on socio-economic and how people feel and these kind of things. It will not replace the decision-making itself. But this is why I'm pleased to be here in the European Parliament on this subject, and I hope that you understand a little bit the approach which we are taking, and I hope that I learn a lot from the later discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doris. It was quite clear after listening to José, then listening to you. I think we have two different analyses. You can say that way. Because that's true, and I think you made some point. You made some point, because when I listen to what I say José, or what can say the post-growth movement, for example, I think that you made a point that the European Commission made yesterday also. That I think that regardless we like it or not, geopolitics exists. Regardless we like it or not, there is a change now. There is a change. Digitalization is on the way. That's true. I think you're right, and I think that the post-growth movement in that case has to take it into account. We can't just do as it doesn't exist. And I think if I understand well your framework, you're talking about most of all the role of Europe in this new geopolitics and innovation. You are talking about the role of Europe for new markets, for competitiveness. And that's the framework that you use to have the train for the new research and for the new innovation. And you made the point on the role of industry, because you want the industry to be sure to be adapted to this new century. At the same time, I would have some question maybe afterwards, because José made some points on the sustainability, not only sustainability of industry, but sustainability of ecological resources that we have. And I maybe challenge you afterwards on this issue, because maybe I saw lack of reflection and about what about this digitalization and what about this industry regarding what the number that we have. Because if we don't have any decoupling, if we have this emission raising and we don't have the resources to do that, how can we talk about inclusive growth in Europe and in the rest of the world? So maybe afterwards we will go back, because I think we have the debate here. I think that's the debate we have between the two first speakers, and I think that we will go deeper this debate, because with Guillaume right now, you are a journalist, right? If I got my notes about Guillaume is a French journalist, and he realized soon, you made a book, if I'm right, a book that will be translated to Spanish and English, so you will be able to read it soon, or in English, not in English. You have to do it in English. You have to do it. So if somebody wants to translate the book to English, please contact Guillaume afterwards, but we have the book in French and Spanish. And that's about the rare metals war, the dark side of the energy transition and digitization, right? So he will talk about the relation between technology and raw materials most of all. So Guillaume, you have 10 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for attending such conference. I'm very happy to be here. I'm a French journalist, and I have been writing on critical materials which are needed for technologies. And when I was invited to this conference, I received the program and I read the title of my roundtable, Technology, Growth and Sustainability. And to be honest, I was very uncomfortable when I read such title. I was very comfortable because I was wondering, is it technology growth and sustainability, or technology growth or sustainability? I was uncomfortable because I was wondering if these three words together were not such an oxymoron, and if we could bring them together at the same place. But obviously we see that there are two views on this. On the one side, the technologies can help us make amazingly great progresses. And we need such technologies. We need research. We need innovation. We need competition. And these technologies are absolutely useful for us and for the next decades. On the other side, such technologies bring new needs and new problems. And it sparks new challenges, which are probably as big as the ones they were supposed to resolve. So this is where the oxymoron is. And for the last decades, and we belong to the same generation, most of us, I'm 37, we've come with a new generation of technologies. And this new generation of technologies is supposed to bring a synthesis between all these contradictory needs. And we know the words associated to these technologies. Green tech, clean tech, digitalization. So technologies can be green, technologies can be clean, and digitalization is this wonderful idea that whatever you do, it's not going to have any impact on the environment because it's dematerialized. And we've been living with these words, making us believe, and I want to believe it, that this oxymoron that I mentioned at the beginning is possible. The thing is that my researchers let me understand that actually you need a lot of raw materials for their technologies. You need a lot of energy, and it will have a carbon footprint. Let's talk about the materials. I've been traveling about 12 countries to see what kind of materials we need for these technologies. Our technology transition is a metal transition. We will need so many masses of whatever kind of mineral resources to build these technologies, to build the technological infrastructure. We will need abundant metals, base metals, copper, iron. Okay, we will need rare metals. We will need cobalt, tungsten, rare earths, which is a class of rare metals. We will need vanadium, beryllium, gallium, indium, 30 rare metals like these ones. And actually, where do we get these metals from? Well, we get them from DRC in Africa. And this has an energy cost because we don't realize that actually for all these technologies, well, we need energy. It's been said, and some reports tell us that all this new information technology, and more generally the digital world, actually necessitates about 8.5% of our electricity. Information technology, and more generally the digital world, actually necessitates about 8.5% of our electricity needs in the world. So how do you get this energy from? Where does it come from? And what if it comes from a coal energetic plant, a coal power plant, or an oil power plant? So then you will have a carbon footprint for it. It will generate the carbon footprint, the carbon dioxide we are trying to get rid of. And we know from the figures that the digital world rejects in the nature twice as much carbon dioxide than the civil transport, aerial transportation industry. Twice as much for something which was supposed to be immaterial. And all of this is mostly, unknown to us. It's invisible. And why is it invisible? But because we don't have the mines. Because there is no mine in Europe. Where does it come from? And what if it comes from a coal energetic plant, a coal power plant, or an oil power plant? So then you will have a carbon footprint for it. It will generate the carbon footprint, the carbon dioxide we are trying to get rid of. And we know from the figures that the digital world rejects in the nature twice as much carbon dioxide than the civil transport, aerial transportation industry. Twice as much for something which was supposed to be immaterial. And all of this is mostly, unknown to us. It's invisible. And why is it invisible? But because we don't have the mines. Because there is no mine in Europe anymore. We used to have all these mines, these freaking mines, but it was so dirty that to find a balance between, bringing together sustainability and technologies, we let the Chinese mine the product for us. And in the 80s, in the 90s, all the mines have been relocated. We relocated the mines and we relocated the pollution. We relocated the pollution of the technologies so that on the one hand you would have the guys who would actually, devastate the environment to produce the raw materials that we would get refined on the other hand to be able to say that we are sustainable. So we don't realize the cost, the environmental cost of these technologies because we don't have to bear it at some point. And that questions at some point, do we have to reopen mines in our countries just to realize what it means because we don't have this education anymore. So the question is at some point, how do you make a life cycle analysis of all this? You can just use a mobile phone and send emails and say, that's wonderful, that's in the cloud. And you can also use an electric vehicle. And when you use it, it doesn't reject any, carbon dioxide. But as I said, pollution is, at the beginning of the life cycle analysis. And it's also at the end, because what do you do with all these materials when you need to recycle them? And we don't want to recycle them. So we send them back to China and Africa. And we don't, please don't tell me any more about this. I don't want to know. So when you appreciate this life cycle analysis, you have to wonder what is the ecological impact of a technology? What is the sanitary impact of a technology? What is the economic impact of such technology? Because you need to dig more deeper and deeper, and it has an economic cost. What is the energetic impact of a technology? Because you need energy to create energy. But at some point, if you need more energy than the one you can create, that creates a problem. And it has also a social impact. So the question that I can bring from such remarks is actually where the technology come at a higher cost than the benefit we can take from it. And it's very hard to answer the question because I'm not here to judge whether you can make such a use or such a usage of these technologies, but because we start having more and more indicators which tells us precisely how much raw material, how much energy you need for such a technology and what it means in terms of carbon footprint, where at some point you can appreciate the threshold after which the needs for the benefits of a technology comes at a higher cost than the benefits you can take from it. And I can imagine in the next years and decade an evolution of our knowledge of such invisible impacts of the technologies we hadn't seen until here because of this relocation that I've mentioned. And I can imagine a day where you and I will be much more informed and that where we will be able to understand and to see this threshold being passed and where our views on these technologies could change. But actually, this question brings another question. What usage do we want to do of these technologies? which use? I mean, the question is not necessarily do we need the technology? The question is what consumption, what will be our new consumption trends for such technologies? Let me just explain you with an example. We all need medical imagery, IRM, to detect breast cancers. It's absolutely necessary. Well, these technologies need lutetium, and lutetium is one of the rarest rare earths on Earth. You need 1,250 tons of rock to extract 1 kilogram of lutetium. So you can imagine the impact on the environment of such a kilogram, but on the other side, how many lives can you save? And obviously, the threshold is fine for us. We get better benefits than the cost of extracting the lutetium for our medical imagery. Now, at the same time, we send every hour 10 billion emails. And believe me, I mean, at least that's my own consumption, a good bunch of it, I would not have to send them. I just send them because it's dematerialized. Well, just keep in mind that 10 billion email an hour, it requires the continuing production of electricity by 15 nuclear power plants. So you see where actually maybe the cost can be higher than the benefits. And this is where the question can be asked. And it questions our consumption trends, and I just want to finish with this, and I'll be on time, just by telling you a story which dates back to the 20th century, to the 19th century. In the 19th century, the world, our great-great-great-great-parents were crazy about whale oil. We so much needed the oil from the whales because this oil was very good for lighting our houses. And there was a whale industry rising, and the production was absolutely critical and getting higher and higher every year to be able to light our houses and to light the cities. And it had come to such a point where actually there was about no whale anymore. We had killed every whale we could, and the question at some point became, but in the 19th century, but we're not going to be able to light ourselves anymore because we just have no product anymore, no resource, no material, no natural resource anymore. And at the same time, a Polish engineer created the petroleum lamp, the kerosene lamp. And suddenly we could turn our needs for lighting to another raw material, which was oil. So two things to be said here. First, you see that every time we go into a direction which is unsustainable, our technologies, our genius, have been able to find a new solution, to find even more light. And I want to believe that technologies can systematically push back the limits of systems and help us find new ways to live better off, such as the way it happened in the 19th century. There is another story to be, a lesson to be retained from this story. At this time, they could have figured out, but what is our consumption trends? How do we consume? We need to question how we have been completely depleting such resource, and such questionings at the time never came. And we are exactly 2 centuries after in exactly the same situation with new technologies, but the very same questions. How will we answer this time? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Guillaume. I think you made very clear your points. Yeah, I think so. I think you think so too. So, just to sum up the main ideas that you said, I think that's quite clear. But what we said, that you think that technology and growth and sustainability, that's oxymoron. So that's quite complicated to put both things at the same level. So I think that's what could be quite challenging for Paul afterwards. And you say that, yeah, I can bring some new solutions, but at the same time, some new problems and some new challenges. And I think that's, I think you did a point, because before I was saying for Doris, she made a point on geopolitics, but you did also geopolitics. Because that's true, but what we're doing, for example, to have all these technologies in the northern countries, as Europe, for example, what we do is to delocate it or relocate it, pollution and waste. In that case, in Africa, South America, or Asia, but we be part of the footprint that we have. You talk about a carbon footprint. I think that's very important because I think that you said on the emails is quite important, no? For the 10 billion email an hour, that's 50 nuclear power plants. You can do it for the 15. That's a lot too, eh? That's no problem. So I think we can do it with the tweets. That will be exactly the same thing. We have the same figures on that. And so what we're saying, that we have a carbon footprint and we have a metal transition. I think that is a very interesting concept that you said, because we just forget about it, the metal. You need some metal to do all these things. So I think that for innovation and research, that can be quite important, because we are not independent from the metal in Europe. And I like very much what you said about to reopen mines here in Europe, because that's true. You just forgot what that means, because here we are fighting to close all the mining. But what we're doing that, we send all the pollution in West to the other countries. So maybe that's, I think that's a very challenging question that you did, and which use of the technology that we want to do. I think that's the question that we had yesterday also in all the workshop. Which use of energy? Which use of technology that we do? Why do we produce and consume? That's the philosophical question that we have to answer. I don't know, Paul, if you will answer this question, but at least you have to know that Paul is from the European Commission, from the DG Energy, and the head of unit on energy efficiency, and I worked a lot with him on all the recast and reform of the energy efficiency directive in the buildings. So, and we have these debates on the rebound effect. We have this debate on ecological footprint. I must admit that I lost the debate because the European Parliament voted in another way, and the trilogue too. But that's why I'm very looking forward to what you can say to this apportation that we have in remarks.
Very much, Florent, and good morning to everybody. Earlier in my career, I worked on public transport, and I was responsible for liberalising urban transport. And I used to go to meetings with trade unionists, and they all used to look at me, and they would never smile. And I think I might be in that role again today, but that's the only joke I'm going to get away with, I suspect. What I wanted to do, I'm an energy person. I lead a team of energy people. We're doing things which we think work in our own terms. I want to describe what we're doing and then I'm interested to see to what extent those things which work in our terms work or don't work in the terms of this conference and of this process. There are three main energy sectors. We have our holy trinity as well, which is transport, industry and buildings. And Doris has talked a bit about industry. I'm going to talk about buildings. And buildings in our language also means, rather bizarrely, the things that we do in buildings, such as sending emails. So I'm talking about all of the energy use that goes on within buildings and in order that buildings do what we want them to do. Heating is still the biggest thing that we use energy for in our buildings. After that, and it's more than 50%, after that, the biggest three are lighting and hot water, and in some places, and more in commercial buildings than in private buildings, cooling. But cooling is growing very fast. And then we have all of the other uses. You're right, Guillaume, to talk about the technologies, but they're still down at the bottom compared with heating. Fridges as well. Fridges are big energy consumers. But there's a set of things which are growing in proportion as we reduce the energy that we use directly for heating itself. So those are the things which we're talking about. I'll start with one aspect of sustainability, which is decarbonisation. There is no question if we're going to if we're going to go even to minus 80% greenhouse gas emissions in Europe by 2050, let alone if we go further, as is now under discussion, that the building sector needs to go more or less to zero. Because the sectors which are harder to change, like agriculture, like heavy transport, like high temperature heated industry, if there's any fossil fuel left that we can emit, that we can use, it will need to be in those sectors, and therefore buildings and, incidentally, electricity generation need to go to zero by 2050. And that's what we're working to do. And I'd say three things. We can do it. There are different ways to do it. And the ways to do it are generalisable. These are not only European answers to these questions. One way of thinking about the ways to do it is that there are 6 ways to do it. 3 of them are physical and 3 of them are soft. Physically, and the one that is the kind of the classic that we think about when we think about building energy efficiency, is renovating existing buildings to a zero energy level. And conventionally, we think about on-building renewable energy or in-building renewable energy as part of that process. So your solar PV or your solar thermal or your biomass boiler count towards those targets. We may end up having a discussion about biomass. I don't want to focus on that at the moment, but it's part of how we think about it. So the classic solution is to renovate existing buildings so that, and it can be done. It costs a lot of money, but it can be done. A second alternative is to knock down existing buildings and build them from scratch as zero energy buildings. And that's cheaper, but it's not actually what we want to do with our cities. I think we should have more demolition than we have, and there are some pretty horrible buildings out there that it would be good to knock down, but I don't think it's a workable policy, and it doesn't feel particularly like a sustainable policy to say that Rome or Florence or Madrid or even Manchester needs to be knocked down and replaced by buildings which are more energy efficient but look very different. The third solution is to rather than having buildings which need no energy coming in, to have them have energy coming in, but it's renewable energy coming in. And that either means electricity or it means district heating and district hot water from waste heat from industry or from renewable energy that's been used to generate that. And certainly a big role is likely to be played by replacing non-electric forms of heating with heat pumps. I mean, that's the single strongest policy that you can imagine there. And heat pumps use a mixture of energy from the ambient air or from the ground and electricity to harvest that. And if that electricity itself is generated from renewable energy, that's a physical way of decarbonising buildings without changing the physical building itself. So those are the three physical routes that you have. Three non-physical routes? Well, we could reverse our trend to live in bigger buildings, or we could use our buildings more intensively. I mean, I'm a bit dubious about Airbnb, but Airbnb can be seen partly as a more intensive use of building assets that exist. The second thing we can do is change how we use the buildings that we're in, that we live in or that we work in. I mean, a simplistic example is we can get better at turning out the lights when we leave the room, at remembering to do that, and we can, as a policy, encourage people to do that. And the third thing that we can do is use technology to achieve the same impact as that. So that's why I gave the lighting example. So we can also have technologies which will turn out the lights when you leave the room. We can have technologies which allow you to ring up and say, I'm on my way home, will you turn the heating on now? Rather than always turning the heating on at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, but it happens that this time you're going to be out for the evening, so you don't need the heating. We can have technologies which report back to you that there's something going wrong with your solar thermal. I mean, I've had this. It's only because I write down how much energy I get from the solar thermal each week that I suddenly noticed it had gone to zero in the middle of the summer. But it'd be much better if the little thing on my roof sent me a message saying, look, Paul, you need to look at your heating, your hot water system. So there are ways in which technologies can simulate the results of behaviours, is part of what I'm saying. So looking at all of those different solutions to decarbonising Europe's building stock, which solution should we use? I have two gut reactions to that question. First of all, the right answer is not to use one. The right answer is nearly never to use one. The right answer is almost always, these are difficult problems, and to try and bring all the tools simultaneously is probably going to be better than to use one approach. And that means the hard and the soft approaches. And I would like to see a policy. I mean, our policy, in fact, in practice, is trying to use most of those approaches. But at European level, we haven't gone far down the behavioural road, which, of course, is an issue very much in this context. Secondly, I would like us to choose partly through doing what people want. I mean, that's not standing back from our responsibility to explain to people why there are lovely things out there that they don't currently want that they can want. But I think one of the great things that happened is the horrible buildings that I mentioned earlier are the ones roughly that were built between the 1950s and the 1990s. people love old buildings, but people also love the modern buildings that we're building today. My daughter, when I asked her the building that she likes most in the world, said this building, which is quite a nice comment. I'm not saying it's an energy efficient building, but I'm saying that we've found ways, it's actually possible to find ways that the new buildings that we're building or the renovations that we're doing are ones that have something to do with what people want to live in or want to work in. And that the building replacement or the building modernisation can go with that. All right, coming to your topics, where is technology in this? It's not at the forefront. It's there when we think as a team about what we're doing. It's not at the forefront of the problems we see in making these things happen. What's at the forefront of the problems we see in making these things happen are not, we need better technologies. The problems are organisational, governance, institutional in the wide sense. They're problems like how do we, some of the building controls that are automatic rely on big data. How do you make sure that that big data is private? How do you make sure that your electricity company doesn't know when you've had a shower? And how do we at the same time use a tool which is able to predict when you need to have a shower and heats up the water for that moment? So another kind of problem, the landlord-tenant problem. I have a house in the bottom of my garden. It's G-class. I shouldn't say this, should I? It's shameful. It's G-class because the tenants pay the bills. I mean, this is... And I got punished because European legislation requires the tenant, when they move in, to know what the performance would be. After that legislation came in and I changed tenants, I lost €100 a month because they could see that I was selling them something which isn't decent. But the landlord-tenant problem is exactly exemplified in my own life and in many, many other situations. They don't have an incentive to invest because it's my building. I don't have an incentive to invest because they pay the bills. And finding ways to solve those problems will get us further forward. Changing the finance sector so they don't treat this as something weird, but they actually come knocking on your door and say, I would like to renovate the building at the bottom of your garden, Paul, and we'll share the financial benefits. We don't understand why they're not doing that, but we're working, for example, with the European Mortgage Association to see whether we can get data that shows that people who invest in energy efficiency are less likely to default on their loans and therefore should get a better rate. So things to get the finance sector working with us are the kind of problems that we're addressing. Multi-occupied blocks, really big problem, both in Western countries and very greatly in the countries which used to be beyond in the Soviet area where you had all these Khrushchevsky sort of blocks. Very often they were privatized. And then you have 300 people owning individual buildings, owning individual flats. How do you get them all to agree to a renovation project? Or is 75% enough or 50% enough? So these are the kind of challenges that we have more than technological challenges. But I absolutely accept that there are technologies which we're relying on. There are both IT technologies and there are physical technologies for insulation, for better heaters that we're relying on to get to these goals. Where's sustainability in this? We damn well need a way to do the thing we're trying to do, which is to decarbonise buildings. There isn't any doubt that that is a sustainability goal. But you're right, Guillaume, that there's a materials issue here as well. And it's a materials issue that we understand less well. We know less about the materials impacts of what we do than we know about the energy impacts. We do know about the carbon footprint of what we do. I can talk about that if you want to. We don't know about where the metal, we don't know the equations around the metals that you're talking about. And sometimes, and on balance, we did one very simplistic analysis. What are all the different impacts of the going to a 30 or 35% energy efficiency target for 2030? All of the indicators are better than business as usual, except that we use more materials. Now, that's just, the answer is so many million tons, and that doesn't tell me very much, but it suggests at least you're right, this is an area that we need to look into more. What I will say is that our tools for energy efficiency are able to address also at least some of the material impacts. We already address water use, for example, when we regulate washing machines. We don't just regulate their energy use, we regulate their water use. We're working on a repairability index that would go on the label so that when you buy something, you don't just know what the energy use is likely to be, which we already cover, but you would also have an indication of how likely the damn thing is to break down and cost you money and inconvenience. If we can find indices, then those are things that we actually can use, the tools that we already have for product policy, for buildings policy, we can use also for circular economy, for materials policy. I'm going to... So there is a clear link with sustainability. Finally, where is growth in this? And then I'll stop. Our policies, these policies, are thought to deliver growth. So it's not so much that... I mean, it's a good thing that that is so, because it helps us get support for these policies. They do it in two ways. The first one is that we use unused resources. So building renovation uses unemployed people. And it's one of the reasons it's a great policy is because the kind of jobs that it creates are the kind that I think our society needs, skilled, manual jobs, which create a home for the kind of people who are being pushed out of the labour market by many of the technological changes that we're seeing. And by doing that, by taking an unemployed person, by not spending money on Russian gas and spending the money instead on the wages of an unemployed person who goes up on your roof and puts a solar thermal up there, that translates into a higher number in Europe's GDP. And that kind of thing goes on all the time if we make these policies work. The second reason we have growth is your rebound effect. Because when we save money, I mean, these policies are good because they save money. They reduce our energy bills, and we're spending money on that energy. They also reduce the demand for energy, which brings down the price of energy. So through both of those effects, people and companies have more money. And they spend that money. And partly they spend it on the same thing that they've saved, and that was Florent's example, which is because it doesn't cost as much to motor, they motor more. And partly they spend it on something else. And that something else, the spending it on the something else, appears in Europe's accounting as GDP growth, and it also has an energy impact. But it isn't, I haven't seen the data that you were talking about, but in general it's not 100% energy impact. Because if you want to buy cheap energy, so if your aim was to have the most CO2 emissions per euro, you couldn't do better than buying gas central heating. And so when we reduce the demand, which we're pretty good at doing, for gas central heating, when people spend that money on something else, if their aim was to have as high CO2 emissions as possible, it's pretty hard to find something in the market which has that. And yes, part of the money they spend on holidays in Ibiza, which they fly to, and that's a pretty good way of generating emissions, all the more so because aviation fuel isn't taxed. But part of the money they spend on going to the hairdresser more often, or on enabling social care so that elderly people can have their toenails cut, which has a relatively low impact. I'm giving examples, but the rebound effect exists, but it is not 100% rebound effect. So our policy delivers, whether this is good or not, but our policy delivers both for energy reduction and in things which appear in Europe's accounts as growth. And you may or may not think that's good, but we damn well need policies to do this. And if it wasn't the case that they did that, it would be an awful lot harder to get support for them. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Paul, and thank you very much for entering the debate. No, that's what we are looking for, to have this debate between the different point of views that we can have around the table. And if I'm right about your points, you did. That's right, you're working on the energy efficiency in buildings, and that was the last week recast that we did, and that's what we are looking for decarbonization for 2050. That's the goal of the European Union. And you talk about these two ways to do that, the free physical routes and the free non-physical routes, if I'm right about what you said. And I was a bit surprised, maybe I'm not surprised, but maybe challenging you on that way. You put the technologies on the non-physical routes. And as we said before, it was quite clear that technology is physical, most of all. So maybe we will go back on that, but that was very interesting to see the different analysis that we can do, the different framework that you use to explain the reality now. And I think I must say that you made a point on technologies, on the data, the big data and the personal data. That's something I think that the European Union is doing quite well right now, and that's right, we did it. For example, you are much more well protected right now with the different directives that we talk. So I think that's important to give this point. And at the same time, I think you asked a question, or you made a reflection very interesting about the rebound effect. You say that's not 100% rebound effect. So maybe we'll come back and we'll ask maybe this question to José, because I think that we have a debate about this rebound effect. Maybe I will go back first to Doris, because I will give you like 2 minutes now just to answer the question, or just to rebound, if you want, with the other ones. And my question is, because on the first presentation that you didn't talk a lot about sustainability and the things that José and Guillaume talk about, the materials, for example, the emissions. So how do you cross the two things when we say what we are delocalizing, for example, pollution and waste, when we're saying that really the emissions on a global level are much more higher than before? How do you cross these two things, technology and sustainability, from an ecological point of view? So what's the point? Because we clearly see that we have some limits here, and innovation should take it into account.
Indeed, that's a question which actually goes beyond technological research and innovation. It involves other sorts of research, and it has a political component as well. If I would give you the example of, let's take the example of the steel industry, because it's a beautiful example and they really face challenges. We have a strong steel industry in Europe, but they are facing huge competition, and I don't think I need to go into detail in terms of overcapacities, price competition, etc. Now even the new geopolitical situation around that sector. If we want to keep a strong steel industry in Europe, which also has an impact on the society in terms of, first of all, knowledge. We heard about before, we don't have the knowledge and we don't have experience in mining anymore because we don't mine anymore. So the question is, can Europe afford not to have experience in certain value chains and sectors? That's one question. The impact on employment, on people, and all the transition we need to do, because if you phase out old sectors and you want to build up new sectors, you have transition costs, which we also have. And the second is, if we don't compete with the other offers on the market, knowing that, like the steel you can produce in Europe can be more sustainable and more advanced in its performance as well and in its characteristics. So the question is, what does this mean? So we think that, or let's say we are looking into possibilities to help and to support that the steel industry has a future in Europe as well. There are other areas as well where Europe has lost competences, and we come back to the question like, what does this mean now? Because it creates dependencies as well. And so we are in the bigger picture in that response, where it becomes political as well. It becomes geopolitical. I wanted to respond to you. It's not that we let the Chinese do the mining in Africa. There's another dimension to it. You can also say the Chinese were just faster in making good business deals. And I think we need to put things together, because there are many realities, and depending on from which perspective you speak, you see a certain aspect of it. And what we have now at the moment is we need to find a common agreement on the facts, and that has to do also with informing the policymakers, informing people, creating the awareness, and creating also the awareness of what you can do in your decision power. I think sometimes things don't happen, and we have it at all levels, because individuals or even governments sometimes feel that if they take a unilateral decision, it's not going to change anything. And that's a new degree of responsibility, to show what you can do and to pave the way, and to take people and the industries and politicians as well into the responsibility to know about the situation and also their reach and the leverage of the decisions they are having, which we are facing with a new degree of complexity. That's how I see, and that's what makes these discussions so difficult, because different perceptions of reality clash upon each other and different degrees of responsibility. And it's important that we understand the perspective of each other, where we are coming from, what our concerns are, what our conditions are. The industry is increasing. I mean, what we see is that corporate social responsibility becomes an issue. We have reached the stage that boardrooms speak about the economic value of corporate social sustainability and responsibility. This is a big step, and we are not yet fully there. But I think this kind of discussions, we need to give more momentum.
Thank you. I saw that Guillaume just did that, and I think he wants to answer about what you said. And I think we have a good debate about this way to see geopolitics and to see the role of European Union in all of that.
That is just a quick precision, but very 30 seconds. We didn't let the Chinese mine in Africa. We let the Chinese mine in China. They are mining the commodities in China directly, and obviously we signed joint ventures in the 90s, 80s, and we let the mines go and the technology go, so that we wouldn't have to get the mining here, and this is here. No, China is going to Africa too, because they have a sustainability problem, because they know that for certain raw materials, they don't have enough of them for producing all the technologies they would like to sell to the rest of the world. So they go to Africa with a wonderful word that we have all heard, win-win. And they spend their time talking about to the Africans to say, this is a win-win partnership. Well, basically, they export their pollution 30 years after we have exported our own pollution. And they go to Africa with extremely good business deals, and you're right. But because, why? Because they don't have such an interest in making money out of the mines. They can lose money out of the mines. They can lose a lot of money because they get the products and they use them for making made-in-China technologies with the product inside, and then we'll buy the Chinese technologies. And this is where I join you. This is how do we get our own technologies, because it becomes a sovereignty problem. And we have to get our own technologies because otherwise we'll have to get the technologies with the minerals inside from China, which is a strong country and envisioned country enough to be able to develop the upper value chain and not to sell us the raw materials, but to sell us the final product. This is why China goes to Africa. It goes to Africa to get the mines, whatever the cost. It can lose money there because it knows it will get so much on the upper value chain by selling us the products.
Wow, we're getting in the issue because the sovereignty issue, we give a step more in all of that, but I will go back before because I think we can deepen a bit this issue, but I will go back first with José, because Paul made a point about the rebound effect, and he told that was not 100% rebound effect. So what do you think about this perception of the rebound effect from the European Commission?
Well, just regarding that issue about rebound effect, that it's true that in many cases through price effects, once you have a reduction in price with, for example, a new technology, you are going to have some savings that might be spent in some other issues. So the rebound effect, yeah, for sure, it's not like automatic that you're spending the quantity one thing to another. But when you look at what's going on with the different expenditures in different percentiles of populations, for instance, there was a study about different percentiles in expenditure and what the poorer people or the richer people were spending their money. The thing is that when people have more money, in most of the cases, they actually they're supposed to spend more money in issues like more sustainable products or things like that, but actually they're also traveling much more and consuming products that are coming from more far away with more environmental footprints or carbon footprints. So in some cases, these rebound effects might be less than 100%, or in other cases, more than 100%. That's what I would say regarding to this. I don't know if you're meaning about it.
Yeah. And I got a question for you, Paul. I would like to go back to what you said before on the non-physical routes and putting technology on that. And what do you think about the comments that Guillaume did, for example, on raw materials? How the European Commission take it into account? Because we can't just be blind about that. That exists. That's true. We are taking, and we are not independent at all. That's true, what you said. That's a sovereignty. We take all that in South America, in Africa, in Asia. And how do you calculate that in the ecological footprint of Europe?
I mean, we do product policy and building policy. Product policy is easier because you set European rules for products which are traded across Europe, whereas building policy is much more subsidiarity because buildings are not physically picked up and sold in other countries. In product policy, I mentioned that already we addressed things like water use, which were a aspect of material use. We have decided under this Commission to systematically look at circular economy aspects of the products, of our product policy, and with a view to using our product regulations to not just set efficiency requirements, but also set durability or recyclability requirements. And it is possible to imagine setting material use requirements at that point. In order to do that, we need, because this stuff is negotiated with industry, it's tested by market surveillance authorities. This is quite hardcore stuff. We need to be able to really, we need better knowledge than we currently have. We've given a mandate to SEN, the European standardization body, to enable us to have metrics and measurement techniques for the different things that we're looking at. It's a very daunting mandate, but they're getting on with it. And we're already taking some of the, we're not there, but we have a path. And I'm not saying that we should use that path for the material issues that you're saying, but we have a path which will involve us investigating that, and if it is possible and right, in our sense of what is right, we will use it. So I think we're going the right way. I also think that the recyclability, reuse, repair dimension, it's not the full solution to this problem, but it's certainly, if you could use each individual bit of whatever rare earth you're talking about twice rather than once, that's better than only using it once. And we can, certainly, and we're more advanced in that dimension of our work. And as I said, the repairability is about making things last longer so they don't get chucked away. On building policy, we could do similar things, but it's much more tricky because we're negotiating with member states. DG Environment is working on something called levels, which is a way of describing the performance of buildings from a wide range of sustainability indicators. I don't know it well enough to know whether it includes material use, but I'm sure it does in some ways. The issue is how you operationalise that. You have two problems. First of all, how do you count? How do you score? How do you measure? And secondly, how do you ensure that a building which uses less of these resources has an institutional way of being described in that way, and that's where we have a problem. So for products, we have the institution right, but we need the measurement techniques. For buildings, we're also needing to get the institutional approaches. But again, we're working on both of those things.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So now we will go to the room. I think you have a lot of questions and remarks to do. I'm sure about that. So I will take 5 questions to begin. Yeah, some question, a lot of question. That will be totally aleatory, so I don't know you, so yeah, yes. And I will do gender balance too, so yeah. So here we go. First one.
Thank you very much. My name is Aline Fares. I had no expectation from the Commission's interventions, but I'm quite. I'm trying to find the word in English. Consternated. Consternation is the feeling I have. I'm stuck with. Because on the one hand we hear about new markets, new business model, industry as the ones to mobilize for solution to the incredible challenge we are facing, and that was well described before at the beginning. On the other hand, we heard a, to me, not funny joke about the privatization of public transport. In a lot of cities we are suffocating because of pollution. because public transport is being underinvested, and so on and so forth. And in fact, what all this makes me think of is that we're talking about innovation, we are talking about technology, but this way of approaching things is really like we're stuck in the 80s. You know, with the market-based solutions, privatization, private money, and so on. Whereas these policies have shown their failure since 30, 35 years. The crisis that we had, and that was referred to in 2008, the financial crisis, has made things worse. Because of the fiscal pressure of saving the banks and so on, because of the public expenditures that have been decreased and because of austerity policies. And so in the end, there is more money that is being accumulated on the financial system side, on the large capital holders side. And all this money that has been saved and pushed to grow more and more since the financial crisis is in search for profitable investment. And they don't care what this investment will be. They don't care what this investment will be, and they don't care how good a response to the challenge, the environmental, energetical, and so on, challenge it is. It's just a matter of making a profitable investment. And if you think about, for example, the solar, I will make it short, sorry. The solar power plants that have been built, for example, in the south of Spain, these huge solar power plants, I can't imagine the amount of energy and material that you need to build this whole centralized stuff. It's like, energetically, it's a nightmare. It's all centralized. You have a lot of waste but the thing is that this kind of project fits the capital logic, large amounts of capital in search for profit. They don't like decentralization. They don't like small projects. They don't like all this. And therefore, what I want to finish with is that we shall stop absolutely as rapidly as we can to go for capital-based solutions and for private-based solutions, because the capital is shaping the solutions and they are very far from what we need. We need urgently to turn to public, commons-based solutions, local, decentralized and under citizen control, and not policies that are designed to please capital holders and large corporations. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, more than a question, that will be that's a comment, that's a direct message to the European Commission. I totally agree on that. So, for once, I don't feel alone in this room. Thank you very much. Because sometimes that's complicated to be a minority in the European Parliament. So, next question, over there.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you for this comment. And I would say that we already have all these solutions. We don't need more innovation. I mean, we know how to make a city with green transport. It's called a bike, it's called cargo bike, it's called trailers. We know how to have food sovereignty in a local place. It's called agroecology, it's called permaculture, it's called agroforestry. We know how to insulate properly a building in the winter. It means to learn how to be colder, to wear a pullover inside and not to be in t-shirt inside. So it's to go to what is the only green, sustainable, smart technology or energy, that's the one we don't consume. And it's to go to sobriety. It's to go to frugality. It's to be free in not consuming what we don't need anymore and to liberate ourselves to this highly technological world. And it's to go to low technology, low tech, so to change paradigm. And moreover, low tech, it's much more democratic because we have an understanding of what is a low-tech technology, so it's really to reappropriate the meaning of the tools that we are using. It's to reappropriate autonomy. And the solutions are here. We just need to change the logic. And the problem is that within our economic models, low-tech are not profitable. What is profitable is planned obsolescence. It's to take away from the control of the people their technology. So we should change paradigm, and that's what I want to say.
Same button, different. Push the button. Push the button. And then it's on your right. You got it. You got it.
Huh?
It's on. It's on. No, don't touch it.
Technology. It's not helpful. Okay, thank you. Thank you. I want to make a comment and a question. The European Commission has launched already for more than 15 years a fantastic program, framework program for research, which, by the way, has been financed up to now with 77 billion euro, and the next program, the Horizon 2020, will be more than 100 million euro. This is a fantastic, really, organization. One point, we don't know anything of the results of this program. The impact is unknown. And the impact touches more, I would say, university, because university participate to this research program, and university, at least in several countries, has one of the major tasks to create spin-off, start-up, and create works. Unfortunately, the European research programs do not take in account the technology innovation that has been ranked by United Nations. And by the way, number one country is Switzerland, which is not part of the European Union, followed by Netherlands, Sweden, United Kingdom. France, the greatest nuclear plant company in Europe and in the world, is 24th. It means that the innovation in France is almost zero. Now, it's very important that the European Commission, the society, give value to spin-off and start-up, because start-up is a basic work for the industry, for the creation of jobs, and I would like that the European Commission give more weight to the impact that this research program has given, and of course encourage more European countries to participate to the framework program, because United States is number 5, Hong Kong is number 6, China is just 25th country, but China is raising very much. So I think European Commission should push more to European companies to participate, which, by the way, it's already a big record, but also it's very important to evaluate and support the impact, the results of this program. Thank you.
That's the other button. No, the other one. Can you help? Can you help him? Just some questions over. There you go. You? No, you.
Thank you. I'm Roxane Leberger. I'm doing a PhD within the Joint Research Center from the European Commission, and also in ID, which is a German research center. I see for me an issue within the innovation word actually, because it's like I have the impression that we have like both kind of utopias towards innovation. It's how to make it like growing. This is like kind of the growth mindset, I would say. And I don't see, or I would be curious to know how we could kind of convince people that have the growth arguments. How can we combine, or do we want innovation in the future world, and how can we make a degrowth innovation? I guess it's a bit like, how can we phrase innovation within a degrowth of post-growth world? I wonder a bit about like this concept, and what do we want in the future? Thank you.
All right, another question. You? You're the chosen one.
Yes, it was. Hi, I'm going a little bit back to the Commission because yesterday I got a weird response that hopefully I won't get today, but this for me was a post-growth conference, and I
I never hear from the Commission, from the institutions, the word degrowth, which is a little bit, it's not even an oxymoron, it's a lot, like you're seated next to scientists that give you all the information. It's more of a cognitive dissonance. I understand that the institutions and all companies and all governments are built for and because of growth, but that's a mantra that it's leading us to the graphs that you see here, and that it's dangerous to just keep in it just for the sake of keeping in it. And so what I'm wondering is that how can you find the good solutions that you say you're looking for if you don't make the good questions? And if you hear the people that are studying this and are telling you we cannot continue to grow like this, we cannot all live like the Belgians, we would need a couple more planets, why are we still thinking of going there? And how do you not, I mean, when you think about these questions, how is degrowth not at the center of the questioning? How can we find social consensus around degrowth approaches? How can we find these kinds of innovations around degrowth, around going into more sustainable as a whole Earth systems, not just economy? Thank you.
Thank you. And now I will take a question from the Slido technology, but can I see it a bit more because I don't see anything? Or can somebody read it? You see it? The first question, for example?
Or zoom it.
Yeah. So, first question. Why are we still talking about turning off the lights? Do you really think all these small fix could change anything at the big scale? That's super interactive. So, we have some, I don't know if question, but that's more comments. I think that you can make comments on that. And just to summarize, if I understood well, the 5 questions or comments that we have, that's about decentralization and the model, the first question. A very interesting concept about if we think about low-tech instead of high-tech, maybe for innovation, European Commission, there could be something very interesting to challenge low-tech and not high-tech. About the research program, you had some people encouraging you to make some more research program. And I think that the last question is a key one. The two last that we had, that's about degrowth and innovation. Do you make the good question when you make innovation? And I think that's worth asking this question. And can we have some innovation and research on post-growth, degrowth, on how we call it? So, good luck. You have 2 minutes to answer that. Begin. Paul.
I'm not thinking about going to growth when I do my work. I'm thinking about banning inefficient fridges and washing machines and taking them off the market. I'm thinking about giving people the power to find a house, the power that my tenants exploited towards me, the power to find a house which doesn't actually have high bills, or else if it does, they don't have to pay a high rent. I'm thinking about moving to situations where buildings actually consume very little energy. But I'm doing that in the real world. And in the real world, it's extremely important that I measure, it is demanded that I measure the impact on growth. And if you look at our impact assessments, that is one of the parameters we measure. And it is a damn good thing, it has enabled us to pass these policies, that the answer to that question is positive. So you can ask me if you want. I don't want to stop doing what I'm doing, but it seems to me within this world, what you're asking me and my colleagues to do is to stop trying to ban stupid, inefficient technologies. And in order to ban those technologies, I need to show in the world that I operate in that doing that is not going to undermine growth. I don't need to show a lot of positive growth, and I don't show a lot of positive growth, but I need to show that it's not going to undermine that. That's the world I'm in. Number 2, you are absolutely right, the colleague at the back, that we already have the solutions. I would have added some slightly higher tech ones to the list that you gave, but I absolutely agree that the list that you gave is among the solutions to the problems that we have, and that making more room for cycling, for example, is exactly part of the solution. And yeah, I can go on. And we also agree, and not only I, but the Commission agrees, that we need to move towards local solutions. And part of the electricity market design package, which is going through at the moment, is intended to empower people to be producers as well as consumers of electricity, for example, either at an individual level or through empowering cooperatives in local areas. So certainly in that area, we do agree with you. And coming back to the first person, I'm sorry that you suffer consternation, I cannot accept that we're looking at a failure, that the way to describe the last 30 to 35 years is simply failure. I cannot accept that cutting fridge energy consumption by 80%, that cutting lighting energy consumption by 80% is failure. And it's true that sometimes people are stupid and leave on a second fridge, but still, there is nobody who has 5 fridges because the energy consumption is 80% of what it was. That is 20%. That is unambiguously progress. Now, I'm not saying everything is better in this world by far, but some of these things are clearly better. Your example about solar power plants in Spain, it is true that solar PV has been rolled out both in big and in small, but it's not the big which has got the momentum behind it at the moment. It's the small. And it's partly because, as citizens, we actually like to produce our own power. And more of the solutions that are coming forward, and more of the institutional solutions, are exactly to promote that kind of thing. And there's still room for the big projects, but the world that we imagine is going to be this one where power production is much more decentralised. We, the European Commission. And our job, partly, is to get business to say, look, if you want to stay in the market, that's the world we've got to plan for. And we've made some progress in that direction. I'll stop.
Thank you very much. For those who thought that the European Commission is boring, it don't answer the question. Thank you, Paul, because at least we have some debate, and I think that we need it. So let's go on with Guillaume.
The questions asked are so interesting and so hard to answer, obviously, because we are all caught in our contradictions. I'm not sure any one of us will leave this room and think, I'm going to start to not use my phone for the next 24 hours or use it 50% less. This is the reality. So we are caught in this contradiction, I think. And I'm caught in this contradiction. So I will not give answer because I have no answer and I'm still searching for it. And I came to this issue by chance. I was looking at the geopolitics of rare metals and it took me to the ecology of energy transition and digitalization. So I'm still learning like you and I'm happy to be here because I learn as much as I hope I can learn to use some new things. But let me just make a couple of comments. We need innovation. And we need innovation, and maybe I disagree with you at some point, because we need to make resource efficiency. Resource efficiency is what? It is that the fact today that we recycle less than 1% of rare earths, of rare metals. We know how to recycle them, but not at an interesting cost. And because it's not competitive, basically the miners or the companies prefer to get the metals from the mine rather from a recycler. So how do you develop innovation and research? How do you fund that at the European level, at your country level, so that actually you find a competitive innovation process, recycling process, in order to keep these freaking metals in our economy? And we cannot do without innovation. That being said, it's not enough, right? We agree on that. Technology is not the only issue. The problem of recycling, for example, is that because it is less expensive to go to the mine than to get the recycled product, well, we are in our capitalistic way of thinking, which we prefer to save €2 to have non-recycled raw materials in our phone. And at the very end, the difference is €2. But we don't want to put that price in order to get recycled products. So our fully capitalistic way of thinking of these things is not enough either. So you see my own contradiction. I don't want to not innovate, and I know that capitalism, the way we think, the industrial think regarding these resources, is not absolutely satisfying. There is a matter of technological sovereignty here. And I'm serious about this. The Chinese have the resource and they have the technology. They keep the resource for their own technology because they want us to buy their technologies. And they want to get access to our information with their mobile phones. And we have to think this in a geopolitical way. And that's not funny. That is war. That is a new kind of war we're not going to die. There's not going to be a shot of whatever kind of, a gun. But this is an economic war. And they want to take a kind of revenge, the Chinese, from 200 last centuries where there have been no one. They want to put that away, and they want to be the first again. And we have to keep that there is also here a thinking that we are in a world where it's not getting to be more easy and more relaxed and more peaceful. And how do we keep such, at some point, sovereignty on our resource, but also on our technology, to not be dependent on others? Because if we don't get that direction, others will do it for us. And the last thing, small steps, interesting question. We keep saying, make a gesture for the environment, a small step. Don't use too much water when you take your shower because, you're going to do a green thing for the environment. And you realize that our individual gestures for the water, for example, account for 10% of the water consumption in the world. The 90 other percent, it is the industry. So I can count the drops going on my face when I take my shower in the morning. It will only change 10% of the problem because the 90 other percent come from other things and we don't even know about it. That being said, remember Gandhi. Gandhi changed his country and maybe he changed the world because he started to work for salt, for a very basic question, which was the salt for everyday life people in India. And from that very precise point, he was able to turn his movement into something we're still going to keep talking about in the next centuries. So we shouldn't forget the simple gestures sometimes.
Yeah, I agree with the good questions. They're very good questions, and it's also very hard to lead with the contradictions that we might find. Also getting a little bit into depth with regarding this issue about geopolitics, which is actually completely related, as we've seen, talking about this unequal environmental exchange between north and south, center and periphery. Also regarding intelligence, artificial intelligence, there is a whole geopolitical issue there, because we talk a lot about, in the European Union, we're talking about the problem with publicity, we're talking about privacy, but we're not talking about the potentials of all this data collection that very few companies are doing, which is actually the mineral for artificial intelligence, and where European Union is very bad positioned compared to United States or China. And that's an issue, and it's a big scale issue that we don't talk very much in post-growth or degrowth environments, and we should also take that into account. But that's a problem, because at the same time, when we're talking about all these technologies, big data, artificial intelligence, we're having to deal with the big problem that is social control. The issue here is to who are we giving this social control? How centralized or decentralized is it, and who controls the institutions? So in the end, we're actually getting to a political issue more than a technical issue. And this also has to do with this decentralization, centralization aspect. I completely agree with you, and I actually come from Spain, and I know that issue about these big solar plants. But I wonder, because so many times, we don't have the answers for everything. We make ourselves the questions, talking about the good questions. So if we have to transit to a new energetic system based on renewables, considering the fact that there is no energy that is as good concentrate, as high level of concentration, energy density as oil, we're going to have need a lot of energy, but we have to downscale our energy consumption. But at the same time, so we're going probably in this transition, we're going to have to use those plants, and to what extent decentralization might be enough for the levels of consumption in this transition to a steady state degrowth situation. It's also quite difficult, and of course I agree that innovation is absolutely necessary because of the reasons that Guillaume has said, in the recycling technology, for example, or in other technologies that we might need in this transition. But and there was a question about the European programs in research and development. There's also a lot of research regarding how a big part of research and development is nowadays spending money in research and development for military use, actually. So it's another thing that has to do with centralization and where you put the money and where you put the innovation. But in the end, the importance here is about regulations and politics, right?
Thank you. So Doris, your turn. You have some question about low-tech innovation, degrowth innovation, post-growth innovation. Yeah. And all the innovation that you can do that can help us.
Yeah, exactly. What I take away is a lot of research questions. You have addressed really the big questions where we don't have any given solutions in that sense. But the directions are clear. And if I just speak about the program we have, and you referred also to what the framework programs do, yes, we have the large industries in our program. But half of what we have in terms of company participation is small and medium-sized enterprises. So there is some kind of not so concentrated. It depends on the sectors. It depends on what they are doing. If we look at the chemical industry, they need to observe certain rules. You want to have them safe and non-polluting and these kind of things. That means they need to have a certain investment power into these technologies as well, just for the sake of operating and for the sake of serving the markets. So that leads back to these questions like how much influence can we have through information, through strategies, through policy conditions and regulation. What do we want to regulate in the future so that actually this sustainability pulls through and that the solutions we have already and we know about are going on the market. At the same time, we can't block if we get better solutions in the future. The industry is investing in certain cycles. If we want them to have safe and sustainable investments, we need to see that they have the technologies ready when they need it, also in their competitive environment, which leads us back to this geopolitical situation as well, because when it comes to sourcing raw materials or also global markets, then we are in that context. So on the framework programs, we are looking into the impact. I need to tell you that this is a change in the way we approach research and innovation. We have for many, many years done research in the framework programs, launching it. And I would be pleased to tell you all about what I think we are going to launch in our areas. We have started serious to look into the impact, and I can show you as well one of these brochures, which is a first attempt to analyze where we stand with the results. And I can also say that I'm happy to see that our participants think that coming from these projects, the results will be faster on the market than business as usual. So we are speaking about innovation which we could see within the next 5 years on the market. And then the question is still, how do you get the market penetration which these technologies or these improvements need? And who could be behind and who could be the drivers. We are doing something now also for the startups. You will have heard about the European Innovation Council. We have a pilot on this already now in the Horizon 2020 framework program, and it will be an integrated part in Horizon Europe, where we try to have a place where they can speed up, scaling up their solutions. So that we can benefit from the good ideas, also because it's organized not in a disciplinary way anymore. Things grow together. It's difficult to put them into boxes and to put a number on a box. So this is to create space for good ideas. And we have a commitment also for both framework programs to invest a certain amount of budget into sustainability and also into climate change issues. So this is something which is very important, and this is where we focus in our industry. So if I speak about my program, then we do exactly that. And we are happy to see as well what the outcome is. I would like to say something on frugal innovation, because one thing, we did a study on that, and now you can say, okay, what is a study? But it's the first study the European Commission did on the potential of frugal innovation. And actually, the starting point was as well that we see that a lot of these new technologies of which I was speaking and which we speak about allow a new type of frugal innovation. The main thing is that it's not about high tech. It can be mixed technology. But the main thing is to go back to the real needs of people. And that can lead us back to a sufficiency concept which doesn't speak about sufficiency. So it doesn't put things into competition with each other. And that the industry is looking for growth is a reality in their financial context as well. Even for SMEs, they need investments to do what they want to do and to look and to prepare for their own future. But this frugal innovation is something where I'm actually wondering whether that could be something which becomes more of a how do I say, an approach. I'm also looking for a new name because it has a certain background, of course. But if we look at reasonable use of resources and being as resource efficient as possible in every respect, then it is a lot about frugality. And what we see is that in particular industry cannot afford to waste things. This is why they are interested from an economic perspective as well in a lot of the other efficiency gains. And we take this forward. So I take that back into our discussion to design actually our research and innovation strategy and to discuss with industry as well.
Thank you, Mitch. So I see some first agreement. Yeah, that's not bad. Question. I take the 5 last question. I won't be able to take every question. I'm so sorry for you, but the first question, how are you? Be short, please, because if you want to...
Okay, my name is Anne Snick. I did research on responsible research and innovation from a systems perspective. And I look back at the oxymoron technology growth and sustainability. You could frame it as under what conditions can technology contribute to the growth of economic functionality, serving the well-being of people and planet by allocation of resources in a sustainable way. What we have today is that technology, as was said, is embedded in these institutions, which we call industry, small or big, which in its turn is embedded in financial institutions, which have created money in a way that is scarce, which leads to a tipping point whereby money is no longer a means for the economic function, but becomes the aim. So that the aim of the industry becomes to make money and to use people and planet for profit, rather than being a function that uses money for the purpose of social and... So you compete because money is scarce, you have to make a profit, and you have to grow in a planet that doesn't grow, so you get geopolitics, competition, war, etc. Now the good thing is that we have SDGs that do not talk about geopolitics, they talk about partnership and they talk about peace and all these things. And we have industry, entrepreneurs that say our aim is no longer to make a profit, our aim is to have a societal benefit, social innovator benefit corporations, economy of common good. They are doing that. That is they are not in contradiction. And they embed it in financial institutions which do not have, which want to recreate money as a means for that, local currencies, etc. So why does industrial innovation for sustainability not integrate those institutional changes in the first place, because they are the lock-ins, they are the bottlenecks?
Thank you. Raúl Velasco from the Autonomous University of Barcelona. I would like to make just quickly 3 points. Basically, the first one is that we are still substituting labor, human activity by energy and materials. And this is because we have an institutional framework, institutional locking that is incentivizing this at different scales. And the European Commission and Europe is one of these actors. Why is this? Because when you are incentive efficiency, you are incentivizing obsolescence. You are incentivizing creative destruction. You are generating more waste, more energy, more material consumption. You are not working for industries, to the big actors, big corporations, to change their business. What it is a requirement, it is to, what it was mentioned yesterday, use technology and institutions to change these practices. These practices could change it. We already know in the history, we know how to use energy and technology, how we use hours of human activity to save materials and energy. Just a library is a perfect example. We can just work on this kind of framework. But I don't want to be just in these anecdotal examples, because I think that we have really important trade agreements that are negotiated internationally. That is one of the big lockings that we is generating this. And here, European Parliament, I think, and the European Commission have a lot of responsibility when they are negotiating these trade agreements totally without transparency, and just putting all the efforts in protect the interests of these transnational corporations that is based in this idea of more competitiveness in the world, more challenges that are just basically incentivizing the more powerful power principle. No? Then I think that it is in these trade agreements, if we are not taking into account the environmental and social issues, the labor conditions, then we are happening what it was here described. We are importing more products and so on, and destroying social conditions and environment. Sorry. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a quick comment back to you, because I think that's such an important thing to come back to, that I think a lot of us are trying to do what we can in a market economy, and no one is saying that we shouldn't have energy efficient fridges. These aren't all oppositions. But if what we do is positioned within a context of a system that's reliant on resource exhaustion and producing catastrophic climate change, then aren't at best all we're doing is skimming off the top tier of negative impacts, and at worst obfuscating what structurally is creating these social and ecological conditions in the first place. And then just a question to you particularly, because I think our opinions are most in alignment. Circular economy, friend or foe?
Klaus Basch. I think it's been a very interesting debate, but one of the things that has not been mentioned is the connection between innovation in industry and the military. If you go back and you look at Eisenhower's famous speech, the military-industrial complex is the threat that comes out of the massive investment and innovation that went on in the Second World War and has not stopped since. Why do we have nuclear? Because it was there for the military. Why do we have many of the innovations we have in IT, technologies, computers, and so on? Because of the military. Why do we have interventions into Africa by the Chinese? Because they have a large military that can support it. What is the Americans doing in the Middle East with the oil and fossil fuels? Because they have the military. So I think there's a really serious issue here, is that the European Commission is reliant on military as well, and the innovations that go on, that your high technologies, are supported and linked into the military-industrial complex. And this is a serious issue that has to be addressed and is never talked about.
Last question.
Thank you, Jonathan, from the Institute for Future Fit Economies. I have a question regarding Paul Hodson. I was very I totally understand your position that you have to do an impact assessment to see whether the effects of the policies you're proposing are actually having a positive effect on growth. And I'm very happy that you are so honest and speaking about this. And I also think we have probably some common ground actually on the targets we are achieving, right? You want to have like a sustainable economy within planetary boundaries, as I also want to have, or probably most of us here in the room want to have. But the question I have is, what do we do if the policies we need to achieve these targets are not compatible with growth? I actually don't care whether we grow or not. But what do we do if they are just not compatible? And if I think of, or if I understood you correctly, then the impact assessment is not looking at the target, which is, do we achieve a sustainability or not? Or do we achieve social goals or not? But it looks at the question whether we grow or not, which is a mean. It's not an and, right? So the first question, like to make it very concrete, is why is growth the measure within policy assessment, or is it? I'm not so like deeply into impact assessment. Maybe you can say something about this. And if it's really at the center of it, why, like, or would you personally agree that we actually have to put other targets, like social targets, environmental targets? I think we have a lot of indicators out there which we can use into the impact assessment process of the European Commission, for example.
Thank you very much. I will just take one question from the screen. I don't know which one, because we have a lot of questions. Thank you very much for the people following on streaming. So, Commission, do you realize that tech innovation, disruption, all growth are the exact reasons that lead us to this non-return point and triggering our collapse? I think the message is clear. And I saw before, up, down, I saw a question for Guillaume, so maybe we can put it. Guillaume, I saw a question for you, I don't know. Guillaume, is it possible now to do a proper the cycle calculation of renewables and reallocate, thank you very much, properly China's pollution to Occidental countries? I like this question, but I wanted to... And just one word for you, that's the last intervention that you have, so you can answer and make the final remarks. No, there's no more questions because we just at 12 o'clock we have to finish now. I know that we have a lot of questions as always, but then we have the possibility to have some more debates. So final remarks, we have 2 minutes for the final remarks and answer all these questions that you have, but you know that we have some more debates afterwards. So.
Proper for life, calculation of renewables. Yes, it's been done for all the renewables, most specifically for electric vehicles. And if you appreciate for the full-time analysis of electric vehicles, it all depends on the kind of energy that you put in the battery. Where does the electricity come from? If it comes from a nuclear plant, well, it's a nuclear vehicle, and the cycle, the LCA, is quite positive. If it's like in France, if it is made of coal, the electricity, such as in Germany, it's quite bad, and especially in China, where the electricity mix is 70% of coal and oil. So you have quite, at the end of the LCA for electric vehicle in China, you may end up with the same carbon footprint at the end of the life cycle of the electric vehicle compared to a thermic vehicle. So where is the progress here? That is a question. Reallocate properly China's pollution to Occidental countries. Well, I think that would be courageous because, you know, at the end, this is always the poor who pay, right? The poor extract the resource and we enjoy the $1,000 phones. If we want to have more solidarity in this technological transition, I think we need to at some point bear the consequences, the full consequences of our technological way of life, and which is also to bear the ecological cost of the raw materials at the beginning of the cycle and at the end of the cycle with recycling, but I don't think, I'm not very optimistic because we are all made of full contradictions and we want all the benefits without the cost, and I don't see any political interest, whether in Brussels or in Paris or elsewhere, in talking to the parliament and saying, we're going to reopen the mines, vote for me. That's not going to work that way. So I'm quite pessimistic that we don't bears the full consequences of the kind of world we would like to live in. I just let you with an Einstein sentence. We don't solve a problem with the mindset which has generated the problem. Are we maybe trying all together to solve the problem by using the same mindset that has generated such a problem? That's a question.
Doris?
Thank you very much. I tried to address some of the issues which I found particularly striking. I come back to what I said before. We are working on early consideration and taking into account framework conditions. That is a lot of different things related to sustainability. It is not only the competition environment and the economic and the growth perspectives, it is also the environmental, the social, societal, and I understand we should look at the impact of the financial world as well on certain things. What we need to distinguish is when we reach a stage in the technologies when we see already how they can be used and how we can actually also shape what the framework conditions could look like. And this is where we, for example, cooperate with our colleagues in DG ENER on framework conditions, because we depend on energy policies, for example, with regard to renewables. And the other thing is, when we are still at stages where much of research and innovation, it's more research in that stages, are curiosity driven. Researchers want to find out how things work and if they get the effects they are looking for. So we have that aspect as well, and we need to take care that we don't get lost, but we need to capture these results once we start to see how they can be applied in reality. And we have many examples around here, and they relate to digitization, they relate to the circular economy, new materials, etc. What I also see is we have a need for having data on things. You addressed before already the power of data as a business in that sense, but data means knowledge, means a lot of power in the future. And business as well, I need to say that. So, for example, when we speak life cycle analysis, it is about the measurement methodologies, it's about standardization, it is also about where do we get the data from and how do we know that they represent reality. So this is something which is a research issue in itself, but I can confirm that we are dealing with questions like this as well. And I would like to confirm as well that Horizon Europe will have a very close relationship with the Sustainable Development Goals. And that we look not only at Europe, even if we speak European industry, that there will be also an openness to the global challenges, so international cooperation, and to see as well what are the bigger pictures that is part of the thinking. And here I speak not only for my own part, but I speak for the program as such. And also on impact assessment, when we do impact assessment, and Paul can explain much more on that, we do not only look at growth. We need to strike a balance between these different aspects of sustainability. What we also see, and I come back to the need of data, that some aspects are less or better and easier or less easy to grasp in that sense, so that you can come to an appraisal and an assessment. And the question is still, and that goes back to the policy decision makers, to interpret and to do something with these results. What we are working on is to get better data, and I think as well we need to get data faster to policymakers, because these technology developments need faster decisions also in the political world and in the awareness of citizens. But what we see is that these new technologies also empower citizens to new things which were unseen before. And this decentralization, which is actually happening, and you see it in the social networks, just as an example, is also causing questions at what does this mean at systemic level? How does inclusiveness and control go with each other? So these are questions which we are addressing in the research context, apart from the technologies on which we need to work, because if we don't, then we are not going to have them in the future. And as we hear, somebody else might have, which may have repercussions on us. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll be quite short. Just one thing, adding to the bearing the consequences of electronic equipments and our way of living. I think that one very important question that goes to the people in institutions, European institutions, is to put the focus on tackling these obsolescence that we've been talking about, right? Regulating these activities and creating incentives towards having long-lasting devices, long-lasting technological equipments apart from efficient. So this is something that might regard the supply, the industry, and also, of course, the demand and the citizens, right? And just to answer the question that you were doing, thank you for the question, about circular economy, friend or foe, I would say if circular economy is actually one other new greenwashing concept just to make us create an illusion of that we can continue to have unlimited growth, then it's clearly a foe, of course, right? And but if we're talking about the articulation between industries that in the Commission Doris has been talking about that. That is important, sure, but not only about that. If we're talking also about the adjustment to the ecosystem cycles and using mostly biodegradable elements and materials, then it might be a friend. And also together with a sufficiency target, of course. Thank you.
Thank you. There was a question on the screen, why are we still talking about turning off the lights? I think it's an open question whether what we do as individuals can play much of a part in the transition we need. And your comment about water use being 90% from industry is going along the same line as the question on the screen. I believe that the actions we take as individuals can make a difference. I think the way in which people I know are becoming susceptible to the discussion about plastics is an example of that. We gave up smoking partly because it became socially unacceptable. But I think it's genuinely an open debate to what extent we should rely on people doing things differently in order to get to the outcomes we want to get to. But I'm on the side of involving people as much as we can. We need to be accurate. You said we're still replacing labour with energy. No, we're not. Our work is replacing energy with labour. It's replacing imported Russian gas with people going up on your roof and putting on solar thermal. I mean, you said that we're not doing anything to change what business do. We are. Part of what we're doing is getting electricity suppliers and gas suppliers, forcing them to go into people's homes and fit energy-saving equipment. We have done that. We are doing that. I'm not saying, as it comes back to what I said to the lady over there, I'm not saying it's perfect by any means, but there are some things which are going in the direction that you guys want to go in, and I would beg you to notice those things and not assume that everything is not going the right way. I think your remark at the front about skimming off the top tier is an important question. Of course we do the easier things. As policymakers, we're trying to make things happen. Some problems are harder than others. In my field, a real test will be the Parliament and the Council have asked us to change the heater label at the end of the 20s, and it was a compromise to make it that long, so that a gas condensing boiler, top efficiency, is no longer A-class. And so that you have to be renewable energy to be A-class. And that will be an important change that is saying, what we're saying to people now is when your boiler breaks, if you can afford renewables, that's great, but what you must do is buy the most efficient fossil. That is an example of the hard problem that you're talking about, but we aim to address that problem. We have a timing to do it. We have a kind of mandate from the Council and Parliament to do so. So I think the jury's out on whether you're right, but we're trying to make a picture. The 2050 work we're doing at the moment is really important in describing what the world has to be like to address the carbon problem. And I think then that allows for backcasting, which says that you can't afford to replace the boilers of the 2030 with gas boilers. So that backcasting work, I think, is really important, and it's going on. What should we do if the policies are not compatible with growth? I mean, that's a big question here. So far, it isn't a question that we in the energy transition world have had to face, because it's been possible to identify policies which, according to our assessment, are compatible with growth. I'm not dodging the question. I don't know the answer, what we would do, but I do know that that's where we are. But on the impact assessment, as Doris says, we look at energy, greenhouse gas impact, energy imports. That's what we start with. We then look at health, pollution, and growth and jobs impacts, and that's the wider impacts. And we're trying to develop tools to look at two more things, which is the material impact, which, as I mentioned, is very clumsy at the moment, and the distributional impact, because we might be good for the population as a whole, but we might be imposing the cost of transition on the poor in order that the rich who can afford it get more efficient. The analysis, and that was a genuine concern I had, that might be the outcome of that distribution analysis. The analysis we did showed that no, it is a slightly pro-poor policy. I'm not saying that all those numbers are right, but those are the things we look at.
Thank you very much to everybody. I think that was a very honest and sincere debate. I like it very much because I think that we went deep into the contents for everybody. And to make some final remarks and final conclusions, that's not easy with all the things that you said, but I think that my first question would be, because that's a question, what is reality? What is reality? Because when I look to you, each one we have our own reality. That's, for example, the reality of the European Commission is more based, for example, on markets, on the geopolitical issue and how to make European Union a leader on everything, and the reality of what you talked before, José and Guillaume, is more based on biophysical limits that we have. That's the other reality of the same coin. But the two realities are true. And we have to see how we can combine these two realities, because and that was the aim of the debate that we have right now. Because I saw some consensus. I don't know some consensus, but I saw some things that you can agree. Eh? I think you can agree on that, and I can agree too. I hope so. For example, at the end, you said we have to look at the geopolitical way. We have to look at the geopolitical issues, as you said at the beginning, as you said too, Guillaume. So I think that's something that we have to tackle from the post-growth movement, for example. What about geopolitical? That matters, yes, that matters. That must be important. You said, for example, Doris, something that is very important for the people who ask, that's sufficiency, that's about needs. We have to talk about the needs of the people. Well, that's right, that's something that people are asking, and that's something you did. That's a consensus where we can build on, for example. And that doesn't mean that we don't have to work on efficiency, because both things can be compatible, efficiency and sufficiency. And we have to see how we can combine both things. And at the same time, I think you said something very important before, and I think that we agree on that. And you said at the end, you said the same thing. And I think that we don't care if we grow or degrow. That's not the because that's not the aim. That's not the aim. The aim is to live well within the limits of the planet. That's the aim. Then we'll see. We grow or not. We degrow or not. That's not the question, because that's the mean. But I think that's a way to take the issue from another part. And not to be and not to have the eternal debate, we have to go, we have to degrow. No, that's not it. So let's focus on the important things. We have to live well within the limits of the planet, and let's see how we can do it. And I will take, just to end the proposal that did Doris at the beginning. She said, we want to speak to each other. So that's a call that I make to you. Just take profit of the people that are here. The European Commission, for example, I guess you don't have so much occasion to have them so close. We have to have this kind of debate. We have to be very close, because I think we are all very open people, living maybe in different realities, but living in the same world. So just let's try to make that. And thank you very much for your presence, because as an MEP here, that's very useful to have you here and to have this debate. Thank you very much, and let's go on.